Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. This is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. I'm Yves Engler, coming to you from Tiohtià:ke. This is the Canadian Foreign, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. The Canadian Foreign Policy is a critical look at Canada's role abroad. We've been doing this for about 115 weeks. And it's gone from too cold to too hot in Montreal already, pretty remarkably. There are many developments, so I think I'll get right to things. Hope everyone is doing well and the weather is nice where you are. There's a story in the Le Devoir. Les banques canadiennes s'illustrent par leur aide démesurée à l'industrie fossile. And basically about how Canadian banks, 3 of the Canadian banks among the top 12 financiers of the oil sector. This is something that we've known. This is not new, but this is just a new report that is showing this. And that, of course, goes to the fact that Canada's economy is heavily tied into the extraction of the Alberta tar sands, even though before the tar sands started being extracted, Canada was a pretty wealthy place, lots of hospitals, universities, and we should have kept all of that in the ground. And we knew that at the time, but we don't care about the climate impacts, particularly for the most vulnerable in the global south. On the CBC this week, there's a whole Paul Hunter is down in Haiti, and there's a whole bunch of reports that began. I think it was last night on the National. It was the top item, and it's actually kind of fascinating. It's just total justification for this foreign intervention, and Hunter goes to Cap-Haïtien, says he's going to take a helicopter from Cap-Haïtien. He basically says, well, there's actually no problem in Cap-Haïtien, but then he gets into Port-au-Prince and he's like driving along the road, lots of activity, doesn't really seem like there's any big issue, but he's like, but at nighttime and there's gates. And I don't doubt that there are major security issues. I'm not at all denying that there are security issues. Nothing has really, the underlying issues have not substantially changed in the past year and a half, 2 years. But they're acting like there's just this new chaos that's right on the things have, just changed radically. That just doesn't, I don't think the facts bear that out. But what it does bear out is that there is the Americans are sending in all kinds of weaponry, and they did show some of that. These sort of like light armored vehicles, kind of police vehicles that they've clearly been shipping in quite large numbers for the Kenyans and other Jamaicans, Bangladesh, Benin, Bahamas. I think there's a 6th country, Belize, that are sending forces to Haiti that are basically coming any time now. They interviewed the Canadian ambassador, who's quite clear that we've been playing this really central role in preparing the mission and all different facets of the mission. He's right up front about that. But the reporting is just, there's nothing like critical. There's nothing like kind of questioning, has Canada ever maybe done something bad in Haiti? He gets into some Haitians are not really sure about this mission, and the way he frames it is like everyone wants the mission. Everyone agrees we need help, but there's a sort of lack of trust. But he doesn't really delve into any sort of substance on it. And I've watched now, I think 3 or 4 of his reports, and this is the tone, or some of the interviews on other. A couple of them were on the National, a couple of them were just on CBC News World. And so it's definitely, manufacturing consent. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that the ethos of this, and obviously the dispatching of this CBC reporter to Haiti, is all about the manufacturing consent for this mission. Travis Ross published another piece. He published a few I mentioned last week in IT Liberté, and the latest one is titled "USAID Linked Collaborators: Diaspora's Remittances for Taxation and Redirection." And this gets at the Haitian economy. It's so much of it is about remittances. So from a capitalist perspective, what's to be like made money from is access to the funds that are being sent in from abroad, and so how to get that. Martelly, of course, put that tax on the remittances, which he seems to have embezzled a lot of the money on. I guess that was about 10 years ago. But he goes through some of the efforts there. The other side to Haiti, from a capitalist perspective, a money-making perspective, is obviously the sweatshop. And the Globe, in Saturday's Globe Mail business section, had a big piece about the battle within Gildan. And I don't know if people have paid attention. I don't know if it's particularly important to us, but there's a family battle. The Chamadi, who was the CEO, got kind of pushed out, and he's tried to get faction of the shareholders to oust the other direction. I haven't followed all the details of this, but this in this internal fight within Gildan, the Globe does this big long story on Gildan, which is, as I understand it, or at least it was until some point fairly recently, the biggest blank T-shirt maker in the world. And it was a Montreal company. Now it still is sort of a Montreal company, but in fact, it's all their head office is actually in a tax haven in the Caribbean, so obviously to avoid paying any corporate tax. But its roots are in Montreal. And in this story, it points out that it lists Gildan's factories, and it goes into a bit of its history of being right at the forefront of offshoring from textile production in Montreal and some of the States, and then moving it to these low wage places. And they talk about how they were able to start producing shirts at $1 a piece, or I think it's 12 shirts for $12. And that was because they don't pay basically anything to these, in this story, the Honduran women making it. And Honduras is their big place. So they have eight factories in Honduras. They then North Carolina, Nicaragua, Haiti. I believe they said they have five factories or dedicated contractors. I think Honduras is mostly their own factories, and Haiti's mostly dedicated contractors. Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Guatemala, Colombia. So Nicaragua also is on the list. So this is a Montreal company that's just become this huge player by moving to low-wage places in the hemisphere, and the sort of super exploitation of the labor force. And Haiti, that's a big part of what Haiti is about, right? Is the lowest wages in the hemisphere. This reserve army of labor that helps to keep wages down throughout the hemisphere. And Gildan has been right at the center of that. Their main subcontract at the time of the 2004 coup was André Aped, who headed the Group of 184, the main opposition to Aristide, pushing for a coup. One of the reasons for that coup, of course, was because Aristide doubled the minimum wage. On the Ukraine file, things are looking even worse day by day. It seems like, almost from Ukraine's perspective. The Journal de Montréal had a piece said that Russia took 278 kilometers square of territory in 1 week. Another story said, in Globe story, Russia attacks on facilities wiped out about 90% of their electricity production capacity. So there's been huge impact on Ukraine's the bombing campaign Russia's pursued to destroy electricity grid. Ukraine's turned to prisoners to get more men in the military. The the European Union, as part of this escalation process, the European Union seems to have come to agreement that they are going to use the profits from the Russian assets that they've frozen to fund arms. 90% of this money is going to go to profits. Interest is going to go to funding arms to the European peace facility. So basically, the Europeans are going to be you countries using Russian assets, the profits from that, to finance weapons from European manufacturer arms companies to the Ukraine, to give to Ukraine, and 90% of the money, the profits, going to go for arms, and 10% for reconstruction and other stuff. That's just one step towards this process. The U.S., Canada, Britain, I think to maybe a little less extent, but the U.S. and Canada particularly have been pushing to take all the assets and just give them to the Russian assets, given to Ukraine, which would escalate everything and probably prolong the war. On the escalation front, the New York Times had a piece: as Russia advances, NATO considers sending trainers into Ukraine. And so there's more and more talk about this. There's also there's a New York Times piece: Ukraine asks Americans to give more intelligence on targets inside Russia. So the Ukraine wants the US now to not only give the weapons that they can hit targets in Russia, but also give them the intelligence to do that. And Victoria Nuland, who I don't know what she does now, she left the State Department, I believe, a few months ago. She's out there pushing for this, and basically effectively calling for the US to be right involved in bombing Russia in Russia. The New York Times had a piece that about this escalation dynamic, and quoted this guy Colby, who was in the Pentagon during Trump, and he says, like in the early years in Vietnam, we are step by step moving towards the erosion of the boundaries that we have set for ourselves. We've been in this for 2.5 years. We're in a war of attrition with Russia, and we're steadily escalating. Is that where we want to be? And I think that is an important question. Like, how far, are we going to go in this? And the Canadian government's not going to hold back. That's for sure. The Biden administration seems to be crossing more and more of these red lines, or these boundaries, maybe is the better word. So this is, I think, continues to be incredibly dangerous situation. And obviously, this is horrible for those in the Ukraine, principally, who are getting bombed and having their sons, and mostly some, I guess, daughters as well, killed in the military. Dissident Voice had a piece titled, "Is the US blackmailing India over assassination allegations to be more hostile towards China and Russia?" And that goes into the Najjar assassination in Surrey, BC. And basically the story, it seems, actually, this is believable to me, that the Americans are using some of their the claims that India was involved in assassination attempts in the US, which has gotten a lot of attention and has reinforced this idea that India was behind, which I basically believe was behind the assassination of the Sikh separatist in Vancouver area. And it basically is saying that the Americans are using this as leverage to these assassination allegations to pressure India to take more of its geopolitical perspective on Russia and China. And I think that's a believable situation. On China, you knew this was going to happen, right when the Americans moved towards the TikTok ban, you knew that was coming. There was going to be a whole push here. And lo and behold, you have a report that came out from our good friends at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, titled, or the Globe headline was, "Report calls for Canada to follow US's lead in banning TikTok over foreign interference fears." And then a couple of days later, the head of CSIS came out and said TikTok is a big danger. and you had Trudeau saying, "I'm really concerned," and they're setting the groundwork here for Canada to follow the U.S. in some sort of legislation in banning TikTok. And honestly, the business about the Chinese government wanting the personal information on, like, you know, my nephew in Saskatoon who's big on TikTok, 17. Honestly, there are like hundreds and hundreds of corporations that information is they're far more interested in that. There are, I think, even, government apparatuses, Canadian, US, whatever. The business of the TikTok stuff is a pretty remarkable. The idea that this is all run from the Chinese government and they're all getting this intel on, it's just totally unbelievable to me. But this is pushing, and it's part of this anti-China break off relations with China. That's gets into some pretty crazy territory. Now, I didn't actually listen to this YouTube interview, but I saw this post on Twitter or X of this person with his interview with Sam Cooper, who is the former global news person, who is all about how China is taking over, China's interference, da 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 da. And this is the post was, this is what they said. Sam Cooper explains how China purposely destabilizes weak nations like Canada through the import of fentanyl, cultural Marxism, money laundering, and other illicit financial channels. I mean, come on. Like, are these people serious? This is insane. But this is clearly, there's a lot of people who buy this stuff, right? It's the cultural Marxism and the fentanyl. I don't know what those two have to do with it. And then when you sit and think it was like this weak nation, it's like, okay, well, is China doing this to Mexico? What about Guatemala? What about Nicaragua? What about, it's all just so bizarre. But they think they got something. This is, it's working. It's the U.S. empire whipping up a scare storm. There's all these stories coming out of the U.S., all these crazy things, anti-China things. This long piece in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday about Switzerland and this bed and breakfast in this town of like 500 people somewhere in like the Alps in Switzerland. And this Chinese family back in 2018 buys this bed and breakfast, and no one wanted to buy because it's a tiny town and whatever. And so the Americans force the Swiss to kick out this family, this Chinese couple family that bought this place, because there's this airstrip where ultimately the F-35s that Switzerland has purchased are going to be at this airstrip, but they won't be there until 2028. And they bought this in 2018. And so, like, the claim is that the Chinese had, like, sent these operatives to Switzerland to buy this bed and breakfast 10 years before the F-35s are going to appear. Anyways, it's just this long story in the Wall Street Journal. And the Wall Street Journal does frame it as, it's like this is crazy. And anybody who's discerning is like, this is crazy. But the Americans forced the Swiss to, like, get rid of this bed and breakfast because they may be, like, in the back end spying on the airstrip with F-35s. Anyways, there's just tons of this total crazy anti-China stuff going on in the States, and much of it trickles up here. And the head of CSIS has his foot on the dial. What's the term? What's the saying? Of what the Americans want and on this stuff, and him calling for banning of TikTok or not using TikTok is part of that process. Now, in the anti-China kind of hysteria coming together, we're seeing this more with the Zionist propaganda. Okay, and so Ibbitson, John Ivison, the National Post columnist, has this piece which is on the front of Friday's National Post, and it's all about it's basically the Chinese are behind the student. The Chinese are behind the anti-genocide protests. Okay, and the student encampments and stuff. So he says, this is how the story piece begins. It's on the front page again. The public inquiry into foreign interference in Canada has already established that China tried to meddle in the last two general election campaigns. But if a new report into the funding of the anti-Israel movement in North America is to be believed, the Chinese Communist Party is also linked to protests that are disrupting cities and campuses across the continent. He hedges a bunch, and then he quotes a B'nai B'rith person saying, we don't have any direct evidence of the Chinese, but we don't have any direct evidence. That's just a matter of time, of course. But of course, then they, but there's all these allegations also, Qatar and Iran. So it's a full throttle effort to say the particular student campus, this has been going on for a few months. We have Warren Kinsella. He's been hammering at this claims of it's all funded, right? The Protest Montreal funded. And Kinsella has a new piece 2 days ago, even crazier. He calls it the hidden hand behind these protests. And we can't get the details on that hidden hand yet, but he knows there's a hidden hand behind these protests. And the financing so the China is now being brought into the financing of this. And I'm just doing this piece, and then now it's going to be published hopefully soon. But like, there's no hidden hand on the other side, right? We know the Jewish Federation of Montreal has $2 billion in assets. That's who funds CIJA, right? The Federation in Toronto has like $1 billion plus. The other federations have hundreds. They get tens of millions of dollars in direct government grants every year, and tens of millions of dollars in write-offs from their tax receipts for the donations as a registered charity. None of this is like hidden. The pro-Israel lobby is like funding. There's nothing hidden. You don't have to go like searching deep and far for the Chinese who are funding those $40 tents at McGill, encampment, right? Like, there's a whole network of people being paid full-time jobs to promote the genocide. And we don't hear anything about that. And the Jewish Federation, I should say, they are directly linked to Israel through the Jewish Agency for Israel. When Jewish Agency for Israel became the state, effectively became a state with Ben Gurion, who was the former head of the Jewish Agency, which was then called the Jewish Agency for Palestine, and becomes Jewish Agency for Israel after the 48. He was the head of, and then he becomes the prime minister, right? And the other second prime minister of Israel was Jewish Agency, and the current president stepped down. Herzog, he was the head of the Jewish Agency, and then he stepped down to take the largely ceremonial role as Israeli president. So the Jewish federations are directly tied to Israel beyond all kinds of other ties. We can get into CIJA's ties, but we don't hear anything about this. It's the Chinese, finding that they bought 20 tents from Walmart for the encampment at University of Toronto. So there's the freak out about the encampment is obviously going on. You have I thought a pretty funny one of Housefather going with Marco Mendicino. I don't know if they're actually doing a national tour on this, but on Thursday they go by the UBC encampment. And this is his post, Liberal MP. On Thursday, Marco Mendicino and I visited the encampment at UBC and saw signs glorifying violence and terrorist organizations. We are a country of law. The laws protect all of us. They need to be applied, i.e. we should shut down these encampments. Well, McGill got a second injunction was thrown out this week. They're going for a third injunction. It was an emergency injunction, and basically the judge said there's no emergency. You have the right as a property owner, but there's no emergency, and on those grounds, we're throwing out emergency injunction, and that even if there was that basically that there is, he doesn't get into it because it was a quick decision, but basically saying there may be your private property rights as McGill, and we can get into unceded land, and there's a whole question of indigenous right there, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. And the judge basically says that free speech rights may, are possibly equal with McGill's property right, and so there's a whole question And McGill's going to push for a third injunction this week. They're coming for a third one. We'll see what happens with that. But there is a case to be made that at University of Calgary, University of Alberta, and what the police did there in attacking the camps, dismantling, may contravene certainly what we've seen now with 2 injunctions with the Quebec Superior Court. And so that whole legal question on the encampments is quite interesting. And I don't know if I mentioned this last week. I did a list of the encampments. Now we're at like 15. I don't know if they're all staying strong, but we have University of Victoria, Vancouver Island University, UBC, the Kamloops campus there. Forgetting the name of it right now. They got the administration to agree to something before an encampment came. Then you have U of C and Alberta that were attacked. You have Winnipeg and University of Manitoba. You have Western. You have Windsor. Something I don't know exactly what at Windsor. U of T, University of Ottawa. You have UQAM. You have McGill. You have University of Sherbrooke. You have Dalhousie. So it's really remarkable how many Queens, I believe someone's saying there, Waterloo. It's remarkable how many campuses across the country, and it's clearly in a legal gray zone. It's not a clear-cut question at all, despite what they're claiming. Now, there's a dynamic playing out here. I find this interesting, and I don't really know exactly what's going on here, but I think this needs to be looked at a bit more clearly. So they had a 1 a.m. Counter demonstration at the U of T encampment Wednesday, Thursday night. I forget what night it was this week. And obviously, this is part of this whole, you're basically harassing them. People trying to sleep, you come in, make noise, harass the encampment, block people from sleeping. And so the post on Twitter of these people harassing the encampment says, in front of U of T encampment, we are peacefully playing "O Canada" and wave our beautiful Canadian flags. Canada-hating jihadists seem unhappy. Shut down these anti-Canadian encampments now. And that's a lot of Canada and a lot of Canadian flag in one post. They're really ramming this idea that it's this anti-Canada and we're going to sing "O Canada." And then the same kind of dynamic I found interesting seeing this on this Toronto area. There was a claim that a Jewish kid was assaulted, like pretty young, like 10 or 12. I don't know if they actually even said exact age, by another kid, and claiming it's anti-Semitism, and they're claiming it's sort of tied into the rise of anti-Semitism due to the Israel's attacks and this kind of stuff. So they're whipping it up, and so there was this walking of this kid, and I don't trust any of these details. I don't know, exactly what's happened here. It was just a fight between kids. There's lots of questions I have still, but some segment of the community did this whole thing where they walked the kid to school to like show solidarity, which may be a good thing. I don't really know enough to be sort of confident one way or another. But what I found fascinating about it is that the community members sing the national anthem outside the school, where a Jewish student alleges that anti-Semitic violence by his classmates goes unchecked. So they walk the kid to school and then they sing the Canadian national anthem. I'm sorry, I don't know where this is coming from. Like, what's this business about singing the Canadian national anthem? Why? Like, what? And I'm trying to unpackage that. Like, what is that? Okay, now part of it, of course, is this kind of the foreigners are importing this anti-Semitism, right? So we're Canadian, okay, that's a clear kind of kernel of what's going on here. And I think to then take it a step further, so it's the Muslims and the Arabs importing the anti-Semitism and our good Canadian values, and so we sing the Canadian national. But another part seems, I don't know how much they interact with each other, but is this whole kind of like, is this like a far right? I was so fascinated that with the whole, so-called truckers convoy and all that, and how much Canadian flags were part of that, and how the Canadian flag, which, a couple of decades ago had a kind of like left liberal element to it, how it's become like really this right wing symbol and whatnot. So I think that's part of it. It's like a segment of the sort of hardline Jewish Zionist milieu that is really kind of like either on a strategic standpoint of like allying with, or have a real ideological affinity with. I don't, to some extent doesn't matter. But coming with that kind of milieu of, trucker convoy, Canadian flag, I don't know, Justin Trudeau is anti-Canada, I guess, kind of dynamic that I think is playing out here, and I think something definitely that should be looked at. There's I guess a few other developments. I'm gonna skip a couple here. So the Canadian Press has a story about the people coming from Gaza to get status in Canada, and what they had to like the questionnaire they go through. And doctors were asked if they had treated any Hamas officials or fighters or whatever. And as the story points out, it's a violation of the Geneva conventions to refuse medical treatment to a fighter, if even if it was a fighter. So if a doctor was in Gaza and provided some health services to somebody they knew was a Hamas fighter, that's what they're supposed to do according to international law. And the government, Canadian government, is basically questioning people on that. And they a couple of people, when they quoted these people saying this is just outrageous and totally outside of the bounds, totally abnormal thing to do. And it speaks to just the hoops they're bringing in with regards to letting people out of Gaza come to Canada, and this whole like hyper security vigilance business that is going on. Today, the International Criminal Court chief prosecutor announced that he's going to pursue warrants for 3 Hamas officials and 2 Israeli officials. And I just did an interview, which I just posted on my YouTube and on the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute YouTube channel with Dimitri Lascaris on this. And he takes this very kind of hostile position that this is the absolute crumbs. This is the minimum that Karim Khan could have done, and everything he did was to box it into the most minimal questions of Israeli war crimes. And they have 3 Hamas officials, and how they launched it all focuses more on Hamas and on and on and on. And I suggest people take a look at that. It basically is saying that we shouldn't be really celebrating this these ICC warrants for Netanyahu and the defense minister Gallant, because Khan was basically forced into this by pressure, and he's going to do everything he can to not actually pursue this. I think a couple of things that are worth mentioning on the ICC question is that Canada has been opposed to, 4 years ago, when there was an investigation, a previous chief prosecutor investigating Israel, Canada sent a letter pressuring them not to do that, and raised the fact that Canada gives a lot of money to the ICC, which I think was an indirect threat that we might cut that money off if you investigate Israel. But a couple other points, the March 18th House of Commons resolution said that the government would adhere to the ICC or ICJ investigations of Israel. So I looked at about 3 o'clock, I think it was. I looked at Melanie Jolie's Twitter account, and there was nothing about the ICC announcement. And so that's interesting. I'm curious to see how Canada plays that. I should also note that the Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor, back in, I think it was in like August or September of last year, he came to Ottawa and he did an event with the Raoul Wallenberg Center. That's Irwin Cotler's organization. And Irwin Cotler was in Ottawa, was part of it, announced it, and all this and that. So this guy, as Dimitri lays out in the interview, this is somebody who is like a British lawyer, totally part of the it's QC. It's a lawyer. It's a Queen's Community or something like that. When he puts his initials next to his name, it's the special status of this law that's in Britain. It's all very colonial kind of dynamic. But so this Karim Khan has been obviously very clear that he's a Western establishment kind of guy. And Kotler, was playing off that and probably also trying to pressure him against any investigations of Israel's crimes. I thought I would talk a little bit about Levy. John last week pointed out that Jeremy Levy, the mayor of Hampstead, who we've talked about in recent sessions, but he keeps getting crazier and crazier, and he keeps getting more and more clear that he's just right at the part of the establishment, the sort of Jewish pro-Zionist establishment here in Montreal. And he's got a bunch of posts this week, just going down the same kind of racist, anti-Palestinian, genocidal. One, he says the Nakba narrative is a complete fabrication. And he goes on another post, says, there's never been a country called Palestine. Israel has belonged to the Jewish nation for over 3,761 years and always will. No matter how hard the enemies of Israel try, the truth cannot be erased and history cannot be rewritten. Am Israel Chai. And then he's got another one. This is getting down into almost like sort of Nazi territory. It's fascinating to hear claims that today's Jews are not the same as those from ancient times and supposedly have a different bloodline. Let me debunk that. I am a Kohen, a member of a tribe within the Jewish nation, directly descended from Aaron, the brother of Moses. We are the same Jews today as we were thousands of years ago. Okay, so now he's going to the bloodline angle on all this. And there's lots and lots in there to unpack. The first thing is it's almost certainly not true, of course, as Shlomo Sand points out in his book, The Invention of the Jewish People. The notion that most European Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, are come from Palestine isn't based in historic fact, and it's quite a crazy claim, right? The idea that Jews only had sexual relations with other Jews for thousands of years. It's when you sit and sort of think that one through a bit. It's a pretty crazy claim, but this is where our mayor of Hampstead is down the path of the bloodline kind of business. So he's just constant, more posts, attack the encampments. Now, I knew Levy had support. He's obviously the mayor of Hampstead, but he spoke at the Israel Day rally on Tuesday here in Montreal. It was multiple thousands of people, and actually, I'll go to this clip before that. Maybe I'll do that now. Okay. For genocidal freak,
Shame on you. You get ashamed of yourself. You're a genocidal freak, Mayor Levy. You're a genocidal freak, Mayor Levy. How many Palestinians want killed, Mayor Levy?
So that was at the Israel Independence Day rally. I saw him kind of early as I was wandering around, and I later found out that I mean, I was happy to do it, and I thought his reaction was kind of funny to use his umbrella against me. I later found out that Melissa Lantsman was there, and I would have, and Anthony Housefather was there, of course, which I'll get to in a second. I would have prioritized Melissa Lantsman. I didn't know she was going to be speaking, and I only learned about that later on. I would have obviously once I did that, I was kicked out of the rally. I was my cover was blown. That Israel Day rally was pretty wild. You see all these buses with these kids brought in from all the private Jewish schools, hundreds of kids, maybe even 1,000 kids, and the Gazette quoted the one of these kids. When the bus goes by, he yells a "fuck you" or "fuck off" to the Palestine demo that's there. So they're really young, and these I'm talking like kindergarten. I mean, there's all grades, all grades that are there, but the starting from like kindergarten, grade 1 onwards. At the Israel rally, so I said this that Jeremy Levy spoke. So Jeremy Levy's been criticized in Montreal media for this racist anti-Palestinian immigrant posts, that one of them specifically in recent weeks. There's been quite a number of stories, 3 or 4 or 5 stories in different media last 2 or 3 weeks about that. And he spoke. Now, what came out of it, because that has a story a couple of days later, is that the Housefather didn't speak. Okay, so they didn't have Housefather. They snubbed Housefather, and Trudeau wasn't allowed to give a video recording. Pierre Poilievre, Melissa Lantsman, Conservative Deputy Prime Minister or Deputy Leader, spoke. Levy spoke, and the Israeli Consul General spoke, and Housefather was blocked, and Trudeau was blocked. So they're basically, Housefather is not like, he's now getting like a little bit on the outs of the Jewish establishment in Montreal. And that's incredible, of course, insane. I don't know if they're setting up to have Jeremy Levy run against Housefather as the Conservative candidate in the federal election in that riding. I think that's a crazy thing. I think there's no way Jeremy Levy's going to win. I don't think that the non-Jewish part of that, it's a big Filipino community anyways. I don't think the non-Jewish part is going to vote Conservative, and that's been a liberal stronghold for like 75 years. But there's clearly, the Conservatives have some ambition for that seat. Though, so yeah, so there's the last week, John pointed out that the sort of social forces around Levy are like the German Bund in the States, that basically the pro-Nazi German community, sort of German community, and also broader, that had that famous pro-Nazi rally at Madison Square Gardens. And that's kind of like how we should see this historically, this kind of, amidst all the slaughter in Palestine, there's thousands of people rallying in downtown Montreal in support of Israel. I mean, we have to, like, that's stunning. And there's people like Jeremy Levy that can get elected, that are making these crazy, racist, genocidal comments, and there's backing for that. Like, we have to confront that. And so I think that there's sort of an interesting historical parallel that is worth exploring. It seemed a little extreme to me, but honestly, this bloodline comment that Levy made, I mean, I think the guy is this is a sort of Nazi kind of thinking. But yeah, so I think I'm going to try to just wrap up. I had a few other things. One thing is this Breach article about a CBC producer revealing how biased the CBC is against Palestinians. That forced the CBC's ombudsperson or the head of the news, whatever, to write this letter, sort of denying it, and oh no, we get criticized from both sides. So it's clearly made lots of waves. I actually haven't read this story. It's on my phone. I haven't had the chance to read it. I've seen a couple comments about it, and it apparently has all kinds of powerful details about what's gone on internally in the CBC on Palestine. And so people should take a look at that. One thing I want to mention, a couple on the positive notes. There's the head of the Ontario Federation of Labor, Laura Walton, president, wrote an op-ed in support of the encampments, which I think is a good sign. And we're seeing some of that. There's this poll about Muslim voting intentions in Canada, and they're saying that 41% are planning to vote NDP, 31% Liberal. And the last election, 65% of Muslims who said they voted cast their ballots for the Liberals, while only 10% for the NDP. So that's a big, big shift. And there are a couple of ridings. Most of those ridings tend to be Liberal conservative battlegrounds in the suburbs of Toronto. A bit, I think, in maybe a little bit in Vancouver, more Muslim community in Toronto area, where that Muslims have quite an impact. So some of the ridings, I think, were like Jagmeet Singh won in the Ontario, and I think where his brother's running there in Brampton, which have big Muslim electorate, where that would matter a decent amount. There also, I just want to mention, I might have mentioned last week, but I think it's worth mentioning again, there's the On to Ottawa Peace Caravan that began out in Vancouver that is winding its way. It's now somewhere in Ontario, and it's coming from the east. I think leaving on the 25th of May, and they're arriving in Ottawa on the 27th to 28th. There's rally on 28th in Ottawa, and then there's the shutdown CanSec on the 29th in the morning. So people should take a look at that. And I think I'll leave it at that. And if people have comments, questions, and I'll make Laura I think I see Yuri. You can go ahead, Yuri, and I'll try to make Laura a co-host.
Thanks, Steve. So yeah, I just wanted more of your thoughts on the ICJ's landmark ruling on Israel, and the fact that some leaderships of Hamas were indicted. I think I know why that happened. I think, of course, that does have to do with the fact that I think that the Palestinian resistance, did target civilians and did kidnap people. So I can sort of understand that logic, and I think a lot of these people who get in that get into the international court and so forth, they all do have very much a liberal view, and they all tend to go for this kind of both sides-ism. That being said, international law is clear. International law is very clear that the Palestinians have the right to resist. So, okay, if you want to throw some Hamas officials, in jail for blowing up pubs or and kidnapping civilians and so forth, by all means, okay, put them in jail for 2 years. But the fact of the matter is Israel, if Chomsky said that every U.S. president would be found guilty of war crimes, all of the Israeli system is just rotten to a core. So I just wanted your thoughts on that, because it reminds me of a debate that I moderated with World Beyond War on if wars are ever justifiable. And my comrade and friend David Swanson, he tends to he tends not to really like the whole wars of liberation, or if somebody occupies your country, and then you have like the rights overthrow them. So it kind of like was reminding me of was like it's just like reminding me of that. So I just want like your thoughts on that and the recent elections in Senegal and what you think of the Niger government.
You cut out.
Expressed,
You cut out there.
you know,
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know hardly anything about. Well, I think the very, very, very superficial elections in Senegal, I think, were a good thing. I don't know much about. That was a pro. I'm forgetting his name even right now. The pro France leader that lost, or his candidate lost. So that seemed like a good thing. I don't know very much just to beyond that. I don't know much about the government in Niger.
because you were expressing some healthy skepticism, just like I was about. Okay, let's not like celebrate this coup yet, but it seems as if as if they're going in a pretty left-leaning Pan-Africanist, anti,
Yeah,
colonial
the
direction.
kicking out of the Americans, that seems like a good step, and that seems I don't know enough to know much beyond that, but that seems kicking out French and American troops is I think a good clearly a good step. I don't know. I think they actually initially announced it, and I was wondering if it was actually follow through with it. But my understanding is they seem to have pushed the matter to a certain extent. So that's good. But I really don't. I don't. I'm not following enough to have much insight there. But the ICC thing, I think my feeling from interviewing Dimitri today is like take his point. He was very hard about the point that this is like Karim Khan. There was nothing less than he had to do this. He was under so much pressure. Karim Khan tried to frame it all like it was start off with Hamas and he'll probably just never really pursue it. And he only chose Netanyahu and Gallant, who are both on the outs of Israeli politics. Look like they will. And Netanyahu may end up in jail, Israeli jail, anyways for corruption, and they're the time it takes for play out the prosecutions, but Netanyahu will be dead before all this kind of stuff. And having said all that, to me, it seems like it still is this sort of a symbolic value of the Israeli prime minister and Israeli defense minister having warrants out for them for war crimes. That to me seems like you can't kind of deny some symbolic value. Now the whole war machine,
I agree.
The whole war machine continues on, and we saw with the ICJ thing, which was much more serious. Even where the ruling from the ICJ was actually, pretty good for this type of body. It doesn't like the just sort of ignore it and kind of move on. It does it does cut into Israel's legitimacy with public opinion, though. There it is, it contributes to a whole kind of ethos of people saying like this is a crazy country, and it spurs student encampments, it spurs. So so I think that in that sense, obviously, the point that Dimitri's making about this was we should be critical of the chief prosecutor. I agree with that. That it's outrageous. It took 7 months. It's it should have happened before October 7th, quite frankly, right? Like the evidence of Israeli war crimes has been so overwhelming in so many different fronts, and they, having said all that, it's still of some political symbolic kind of value to have a warrant out for, or what will supposed to be some point for Netanyahu, or announced warrant. But
if I could ask a very quick follow-up question, though, is now what do you think that international law needs a reevaluation? Because I know David Swanson is not a fan of I understand where he comes from, being a radical peace activist and wanting the institution of wars to end. But the fact of the matter is, like, the crimes of the war crimes that any Palestinians do to Israelis still pales in comparison to the epic crimes against humanity that Israel inflicts on the Palestinian people. And this kind of reminds me of people who were like obsessed with the idea that like Assad was a war criminal, but it's like, dudes, he's fighting against Western Gulf Turkish-backed death squads into his own country. Of course, innocent civilians are always going to lose, but like, what's he supposed to do, you know? Or what are the Iraqis supposed to do, or the Vietnamese supposed to do when they have such an aggressive, like, you know, like force coming into their things? So I'm curious your response on that, because I think the ICJ is coming from the thing, well, both sides committed war crimes, ergo both sides, you know, should be in the dock in The Hague. But yeah,
I would put different, you know, I think the ICC has been used as a tool of Western domination. That has been the history of the ICC very clearly. I'm not like, you know, a major expert on it, but it became just a tool to target basically African leaders. And there was a lot of criticism around that. And they responded to that criticism by having an African woman as the chief prosecutor for a while. And when she, you know, questioned U.S. role in U.S. Crimes in Afghanistan or Israeli crimes, all hell came down. And then this Karim Khan, his British lawyer from the British establishment, Dimitri was saying that the UK put huge pressure to get him in that position, and you know, he's sort of served the masters pretty well, so yeah, I mean, I think that I don't think the structure of you know, the ICC has been one of reinforcing it's, you know, international law should serve to equalize things in the world, whereas that's not been its history so far. But the international law, I mean, I think, you know, it would be radical if Canada started following international law in our foreign policy, right? So like there's, you know, I think it's important for progressive Canadians to reference how Canada regularly violates international law, be that in, you know, sanctions, be that in wars like Yugoslavia '99, or violation of the UN resolutions on Libya and that, be it at just a broader level of, you know, state sovereignty. It's also important to like highlight the obvious hypocrisy of saying we're about international rules-based order or international law when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, but not when it comes to Israel in with regards to Palestinians, or Syria, or wherever else Israel wants to bomb. So I think that whether the ICC as an institution is a net benefit or a net negative, I wouldn't state that one way or another with confidence. But I think that the, you know, international law is something that is important and should be strengthened. Yeah, but
There's someone named Anne who had her hand up. I don't know. Then suddenly she disappeared. I don't know.
I'm still here. I'm still here.
We're still there.
leaving.
Somehow you
Yeah.
disappeared. Go ahead, Anne.
Thank you. Hi, Eve. I have been to the encampment in the city where I live. You know where I live. I won't specify it. And I just want to say that I was there a couple times this afternoon and this morning, and I learned that Ontario Tech University is where one might want to look for some development. on their encampment. I won't be more specific because I'm not a spokesperson of any kind. So I wanted to mention that. And then I did join you a bit late today. So maybe stating the obvious, but it would appear that the ICC announcement early this morning has served to unify Israelis against the world in terms of, the offense they take it to be that this has been announced. So this is a terrible aspect. Things change by the hour, but that's all I'll say for now.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
mean, Netanyahu said 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago, when the word started circulating that this might happen, that this would be, this grave injustice and a sign of anti-Semitism and the like. I don't know, like, how many people in Israel believe that, or if that's just the commentary, if that's, all the politicians, I don't know. Clearly, that like the Israeli public or Israeli, the sensibilities of Israeli public can't be that important to these kind of calculations, because the Israeli public is clearly overwhelming on board with the killing in Gaza. And in fact, I've seen stuff that says they want more, not less killing. And so it's a problem for Palestinians that the sort of victimhood complex is so strong among the Israeli public, but that is what it is. And yeah.
Eve, can I just ask you a quick question? Are you seeing like the tremendous suppression against free speech around Palestine that we're seeing down here in the states across, including the one I'm living in, North Carolina? Now they're passing laws that you can't wear masks in public. And it's obvious why that is, because they don't want students masking themselves when they're going to these pro-Palestine protests or anti-genocide protests. And of course, the anti-Zionism, equating that to anti-Semitism that's going across all the states, including this one. I'm just wondering, do you feel you're seeing that in Canada to a great extent, the suppression of efforts, legislative efforts to suppress free speech?
I mean, there are efforts, right? You had the Vaughan City Council last week passed another ordinance or whatever of blocking protests within 100 meters of, cultural institutions or whatever. And that's designed for this. There's been, tons of there's these injunctions here in Montreal about protesting the different, in front of the place, that community center that held the 3 IDF soldiers, and then the synagogue that had the Israel Real Estate Fair, and then they expanded that. And so there's some of those efforts. I don't think it's like the US. I also think that, I was saying this in an interview today, that it is a pretty noticeable difference on the encampments. With the exception of Alberta, the other encampments, the police haven't come in. And unlike the US encampments, where there's, quite a few, couple dozen at least, where the cops came in pretty hard. And that hasn't happened here. And I think it's partly because.
Can someone mute who's not muted here?
So
Joan,
Yes, could I say
is someone
something?
talking in your background?
Oh, yes.
So the I don't think, there is all this repression efforts. That's clearly what Anthony Housefather and Marco Mendicino are trying to do when they go to the encampment at UBC. They're trying to have it busted up. But the protests here in Montreal, I would say, the Montreal police have been relatively, kind of surprisingly, because of all kinds of other issues, but relatively good on all this stuff. Yeah, the IHRA kind of definition of anti-Palestinian definition of anti-Semitism stuff is circulating around. That bill in the States seems like a pretty big escalation of that, which I don't think there's a clear parallel here. But yeah, there are efforts, and but I don't think it's quite as extreme as in the US.
Okay, now a couple of people raised their hands, and one of them, Joan, are you still there? I don't know if I'm doing something that people are disappearing. Joan, are you still there?
I can't see anything tonight. I can't see any
Okay,
intent. It's just
yeah,
a-
I don't, maybe I'm doing something. Okay, well, Catherine, can you go ahead? And Joan, if you're still there, can you raise your hand again? Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted, because last week, Eve, you were talking about how it would be great if there was more talk about what's happening in Congo at encampments. And I heard, it was on Democracy Now! Today, that at Morehouse, there were two professors who, including other things that happened at the commencement, there were two professors who protested in there silently, and one held a Congolese flag behind Biden, who was the, guest speaker at the event. And Amy Goodman talked to this professor, and he talked about some of the very things you were talking about, you've mentioned before about genocide and Rwanda backing the M23? And he also mentioned something, I can't remember the exact connection, but a connection between Israeli investments in Congolese mineral extraction. And so, yes, some kind of connection there, which sounded interesting thing to follow up on.
Yeah, well, probably referencing the Gertler, the big Israeli diamond, I don't know, seller. They're trying to get an agreement. The Americans had him sanctioned, and he's there's a bunch of stories this week about this. They're trying to get an agreement to withdraw. He's trying to get agreement to the Americans to withdraw those sanctions. He's like hired all kinds of different high, like Dershowitz and well-connected kind of people to get him off the sanctions list. And yeah, so he has some degree of backing from the Israeli government, I guess. I don't know the ins and outs of that. But I think the more, obviously the M23 thing is a really important issue that like it doesn't get much attention, but the Rwanda's role in continuing to destabilize Eastern Congo is a serious human tragedy. There's serious human consequences, and our governments have enabled that. Not in as extreme a way as Israel, not as connected, but we have strengthened Paul Kagame, and we say almost nothing about these very obvious and substantive crimes that have now been going on for 30 years, really, in Eastern Congo, and it's it should certainly be denounced.
Okay, we have one last question from Joan. Go ahead, Joan.
Okay, I'll just unmute. Okay.
You are unmuted, Joan. Oh, now you're mute. You muted yourself, Joan. Can you unmute? You were unmuted. Joan, have you unmuted?
I think can we leave this to next week, because I actually have a crying child.
Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, Joan. We'll get you next week. Thanks, Eve.
Thanks, everyone. Very good.
Bye.